Iran Daily Briefing, Friday, May 29, 2026. U.S. Vice President JD Vance says Washington and Tehran are very close to a memorandum of understanding that would extend the ceasefire by 60 days. But he also says President Donald Trump has not yet approved it. That matters because reports indicate negotiations are active, but final approvals have not been announced. Today, we track the ceasefire diplomacy, the continuing military exchanges, and the sanctions pressure still moving in parallel. Today is Friday, May 29, 2026. The central story is a possible 60-day extension of the US-Iran ceasefire. Several reports say an agreement or framework is in place. But the public record still has an important gap. Final approval has not been announced by President Trump, and reporting says Iran's leadership approval is also pending. Following up on yesterday's episode, several claims we flagged as unresolved remain only partly settled. On the reported strikes and retaliation, today's intelligence adds more detail but not a single shared account. France 24 reports tit-for-tat clashes on Thursday, including a US claim that it struck Iran's Bandar Abbas port and Tehran saying it fired on an American army base in the region. NPR also reports that the US said it had struck Iran again while peace talks continued. But the accounts remained fragmented. On the Strait of Hormuz language, today's reporting is more developed. Al Jazeera reports the proposed 60-day memorandum is aimed at reopening the strait. Middle East Eye reports that Vice President Vance indicated the proposed deal would reopen the strait. But today's supplied intelligence does not confirm the previously reported reopening timeline, including a 30-day window or mine clearing schedule. On the negotiating framework, today's intelligence does not confirm yesterday's France 24. Reporting that an Iranian delegation in Qatar was finalizing a 14-point framework. It also does not confirm the sanctions waiver formulation from the prior Middle East Eye reporting, or the full negotiating language on destruction of enriched uranium. What it does add is narrower. The BBC reports a ceasefire extension framework has been agreed pending approval, while Al Jazeera reports talks were slated between the United States and Iran on nuclear and other differences. On internet restoration, today's supplied intelligence includes no new update. Yesterday's reports of returning but still restricted access remained the last supplied information. In this episode, the ceasefire memorandum, military clashes around the fragile truce, new US sanctions tied to Iranian oil transport, and two regional strands, Pakistan's reported diplomatic role and Iranian statements on regional cooperation. The lead today is the proposed US-Iran ceasefire extension. France 24 and Al Monitor report that US Vice President JD Vance said President Trump had not yet approved the agreement. Middle East Eye reports Vance said the United States and Iran are very close to a memorandum of understanding. It also reports that Vance said the proposed memorandum would extend the ceasefire by 60 days. That is the core fact pattern. There are several versions of the same diplomatic picture in today's reporting. They point in the same general direction, but with important differences in wording and sourcing. The BBC reports, citing US officials, that the framework of a ceasefire extension deal with Iran had been agreed, pending approval by President Trump and Iran's leadership. Al Jazeera reports that the United States and Iran were nearing a 60-day memorandum of understanding. It also reports that the proposed memorandum was aimed at reopening the Strait of Hormuz. Al Monitor reports that US sources told AFP the United States and Iran had reached agreement on a memorandum of understanding to prolong the truce for 60 days. Al Monitor also reports that a source familiar with the matter told Reuters the United States and Iran reached agreement on a memorandum of understanding to extend the ceasefire for 60 days. Axios, as cited by France 24 and Al Monitor, reported that Washington and Tehran had reached an agreement to extend the ceasefire by 60 days. Al Monitor says Axios cited 2 U.S. officials in reporting that President Trump still needed to give final approval. So the picture is this. Multiple reports say the shape of a 60-day extension exists. Several say it has been agreed in some form, but the approval step is not complete in the public reporting. The statement does not confirm Iran's position on the memorandum. The Washington view, as reflected in the supplied reporting, is cautiously forward-leaning but not final. Vance's comments are important because they identify 2 elements of the proposed memorandum. First, a 60-day ceasefire extension. Second, steps connected to reopening the Strait of Hormuz. Middle East Eye also reports that Vance indicated the proposed deal would begin talks on limiting Tehran's nuclear program. That gives the memorandum more than one function. It is not described only as a pause in fighting. In the reporting today, it is also connected to maritime access and future nuclear talks. The Tehran position is less clearly stated in today's supplied intelligence. The BBC says Iran's leadership approval is still pending. Al Jazeera reports that talks were slated between the United States and Iran on nuclear and other differences. But there is no supplied Iranian statement today confirming acceptance of the memorandum. That distinction matters. A framework reported by U.S. officials or a memorandum described by U.S. media sources is not the same as a public acceptance by both governments. The regional angle is also visible. France 24 reports that Pakistan's Foreign Minister Mohammad Ishaq Dar was set to fly to Washington to meet U.S. Secretary of State Marco Rubio in an attempt to speed up U.S.-Iran negotiations. Middle East Eye also reports that Dar was set to visit Washington on Friday to meet Rubio. That makes Pakistan part of today's diplomatic picture in the supplied reporting. The items do not say whether Pakistan is carrying messages, mediating terms, or supporting a specific draft. They say Dar was set to meet Rubio in Washington in an effort linked to speeding up the negotiations. The military backdrop has not disappeared. France 24 reports that Iran and the United States engaged in tit-for-tat clashes on Thursday. It reports that the US claimed it struck Iran's Bandar Abbas port. It also reports that Tehran said it fired on an American army base in the region. NPR reports that the United States said it had struck Iran again while peace talks continued to end the conflict. The BBC reports hostilities were taking place during a fragile ceasefire between the United States and Iran. It also reports that the 2 sides were engaged in protracted negotiations to end a 3-month war. This is why the status of approval matters. The supplied reporting describes diplomacy and hostilities at the same time. A memorandum that is close but not yet approved does not remove the risk of further exchanges. It defines the current state more narrowly. Negotiations are active, a 60-day extension is under discussion. Final approval has not been publicly announced. There is also the Strait of Hormuz component. Al Jazeera reports that the proposed 60-day memorandum was aimed at reopening the strait. Middle East Eye reports that Vance indicated the proposed deal would reopen it. That follows yesterday's unresolved language about the strait. Today's intelligence supports a link between the proposed memorandum and reopening. It does not support the earlier reported detailed timeline. There is no confirmed 30-day reopening plan in today's supplied items. For the next 24 to 48 hours, watch for one concrete marker, a public statement from President Trump or Iran's leadership approving, rejecting, or modifying the 60-day memorandum. Without that, the supplied reporting supports an outline of a possible extension, not a completed deal. Our first developing story is the military activity around the fragile ceasefire. France 24 reports that Iran and the United States engaged in tit-for-tat clashes on Thursday. The same reporting says the US claimed it struck Iran's Bandar Abbas port, while Tehran said it fired on an American army base in the region. NPR reports that the US said it had struck Iran again while peace talks continued. Insurance Journal reports that the US military carried out strikes on an Iranian drone operation near the Strait of Hormuz. There is also a disputed aircraft claim. Middle East Eye reports that Iran's state TV said a US aircraft was destroyed in Bushehr. Middle East Eye also reports that US Central Command denied Iranian reports that a US aircraft had been shot down there. It says US Central Command stated on Friday that no US aircraft were shot down after Iranian reports claimed a plane had been downed. That is a direct conflict between Iranian state media reporting and the US military denial. The supplied intelligence does not resolve it beyond presenting both claims. A separate single-source item from Crypto Briefing reports that the IRGC strike on a US airbase was in retaliation for strikes on Bandar Abbas. Because that item is single-source in today's supplied intelligence, it should be treated as one reported account, not a confirmed sequence. The forward marker here is specific. Watch whether US Central Command, Iranian state media, or another official channel releases further details on the reported Bandar Abbas strike, the claimed Iranian fire on an American base, and the disputed Bushehr aircraft claim. Our second developing story is sanctions. Al Monitor reports that the United States imposed new sanctions on Iran's military oil trade on Thursday, May 28th, citing the Treasury Department. The Treasury Department said it sanctioned 8 vessels involved in transporting Iranian crude oil and petroleum products to global markets. Al Monitor reports that the Marshall Islands flagged oil tanker Flora was one of the sanctioned vessels linked to Iranian oil transport. Middle East Eye separately reports that the US Department of State said it was sanctioning several entities and individuals involved in transporting Iranian petroleum or petrochemical products. Israel National News separately reported that OFAC took action against Iran's Persian Gulf Strait Authority on Wednesday. This is a single-source item in the supplied intelligence. In the supplied intelligence, the sanctions track includes Thursday's vessel-related sanctions and a separately reported Wednesday OFAC action involving the Persian Gulf Strait Authority. The timing is notable in a narrow factual sense. The sanctions reporting appears on the same day as intensive reporting on the ceasefire extension memorandum. The supplied items do not say the sanctions are intended to shape the negotiations. They do show that pressure measures and diplomatic reporting are moving in parallel. The forward marker. Watch whether the Treasury Department or State Department publishes additional designations tied to Iranian petroleum, petrochemical products, or maritime activity, and whether Iran issues a formal response to the vessel sanctions. Our third developing story is the Strait of Hormuz. As we covered yesterday, the Strait language has been one of the main unresolved parts of the ceasefire discussion. Today's reporting adds 3 strands. First, Al Jazeera reports that the proposed US-Iran 60-day memorandum was aimed at reopening the strait. Second, Middle East Eye reports that Vice President Vance indicated the proposed deal would reopen the strait. Third, Middle East Eye reports that Iran's Mehr news agency said Iranian armed forces fired warning shots at 4 vessels near the strait. Mehr said the vessels were attempting to pass through without coordination. DW, in a single supplied item, reports that around 20% of global oil trade passed through the strait before the Iran conflict. There is no supplied confirmation today of a detailed reopening mechanism. There is no confirmed schedule in today's items. There is also no supplied statement from Iran accepting the memorandum's strait-related terms. The forward marker is clear. Watch for a named US or Iranian official to describe how reopening would work, or for further reports on vessel movements and coordination requirements near the strait. Our fourth developing story is regional and diplomatic positioning. France 24 reports that Pakistan's Foreign Minister Mohammad Ishaq Dar was set to fly to Washington to meet US Secretary of State Marco Rubio in an attempt to speed up US-Iran negotiations. Middle East Eye also reports that Dar was set to visit Washington on Friday to meet Rubio. The supplied intelligence does not provide a readout of that meeting. It does not say what Dar was expected to propose. It only links the visit to efforts to speed up negotiations. Separately, Middle East Eye and Mehr News Agency report that President Masoud Pezeshkian said on May 29th that Iran's policy is to expand cooperation with Muslim and neighboring countries in all fields. That statement is part of today's regional diplomacy file. The supplied intelligence does not connect it to acceptance of the US-Iran memorandum, and it should not be read as confirmation of Tehran's position on the ceasefire extension. A smaller US-Iran issue also surfaced outside the main ceasefire track. Al Jazeera reports that Iran's ambassador to Mexico said Iran's football team still lacked US visas ahead of the World Cup. The ambassador said the team was not competing on equal terms in relation to US visas. That item is sourced, but it is separate from the ceasefire memorandum. It concerns visas and sport, not the reported truce extension. The forward marker. Watch for a readout of Dar's Washington meeting, any Iranian statement on the memorandum itself, and any US response to the visa issue raised by Iran's ambassador to Mexico. We began with the central issue, whether the United States and Iran have a 60-day ceasefire extension. The fullest picture from today's supplied intelligence is this. Vice President JD Vance says the United States and Iran are very close to a memorandum of understanding. Middle East Eye reports he said it would extend the ceasefire by 60 days. It also reports he indicated it would reopen the Strait of Hormuz and begin talks on limiting Tehran's nuclear program. France 24 and Al Monitor report that Vance said President Trump had not yet approved the agreement. The BBC reports that US officials said the framework of a ceasefire extension deal had been agreed, pending approval by President Trump and Iran's leadership. Al Jazeera reports that the United States and Iran were nearing a 60-day memorandum of understanding, and that the proposed memorandum was aimed at reopening the strait. Al Monitor reports that US sources told AFP the two sides had reached agreement on a memorandum to prolong the truce for 60 days. It also reports that a source familiar with the matter told Reuters the two sides reached agreement on a memorandum to extend the ceasefire for 60 days, but that Trump had not yet approved it. Axios, as cited in today's supplied intelligence, reported that the sides had reached agreement on a 60-day memorandum, while President Trump still needed to give final approval. So the supplied reporting supports an outline, but not a completed deal. The outline is a 60-day extension, tied in reporting to the Strait of Hormuz and future nuclear talks. The missing public markers are final approval from President Trump and confirmation from Iran's leadership. In the next 24 to 48 hours, watch 4 items. First, watch for final approval language on the 60-day memorandum. France 24 and Al Monitor report that Vice President Vance said President Trump had not yet approved it. The BBC reports that approval by both President Trump and Iran's leadership was still pending. Second, watch for any official detail on the Strait of Hormuz. Al Jazeera reports the proposed memorandum was aimed at reopening the strait. Middle East Eye reports Vance indicated the proposed deal would reopen it. Today's intelligence does not provide a confirmed reopening mechanism or timeline. Third, watch for further official accounts of the military exchanges. France 24 reports a US claim of a strike on Bandar Abbas and Tehran's claim that it fired on an American army base in the region. Middle East Eye reports Iran's state TV claimed a US aircraft was destroyed in Bushehr, while US Central Command denied that any US aircraft was shot down. Fourth, watch for follow-up on Pakistan's role. France 24 reports Foreign Minister Mohammad Ishaq was set to fly to Washington to meet Secretary of State Marco Rubio in an attempt to speed up US-Iran negotiations. Middle East Eye also reports Dar was set to visit Washington on Friday to meet Rubio. Today, we covered the reported 60-day US-Iran ceasefire memorandum, the unresolved approval question, continuing military exchanges, sanctions tied to Iranian oil transport, and regional diplomacy around the negotiations. We'll be back tomorrow with the next Iran Daily Briefing. For full written briefs and source-backed updates, check out the Iran Brief on Substack. Paid members can build multi-country monitoring across the countries they care about, with personalized briefings delivered automatically.